She can't possibly be right about this. The quiet disbelief rippled through the Senate chamber as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett concluded her sharp, well-reasoned breakdown of constitutional law. The freshman representative from Texas had just methodically taken apart the arguments of a Yale law professor with such clarity and confidence that silence swept across the room. Then, something entirely unexpected happened. Elizabeth Warren, the seasoned senator, former Harvard law professor, and one of the Democratic Party's most respected thinkers, suddenly raised her hand, interrupting the committee chair who was preparing to move forward. "Mr. Chairman, I need to respond to what we've just witnessed," Warren said, removing her glasses with slow precision. Her face was unreadable as she turned toward Crockett. The air grew still. Veteran senators straightened in their seats. Reporters froze, hands hovering over their keyboards. Everyone in the room knew Warren's reputation for honesty and her notoriously high academic standards. "In my 3 decades teaching constitutional law at Harvard," she began, her voice slicing through the silence, "I have never heard such an exceptional analysis of executive power as what Representative Crockett just presented." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Camera shutters clicked wildly. Even a senior Republican senator's jaw dropped open in shock. "This wasn't just good," Warren continued, her tone rising with emotion. "This was constitutional interpretation at its finest. What we've witnessed today will shape how we study executive authority for generations to come." What happened next wasn't just applause, it was a political earthquake. Warren's words instantly elevated Jasmine Crockett standing in Washington and sent waves through the political establishment. The same senator who had publicly humbled banking executives and dismantled cabinet nominees had just declared a first-term Congresswoman. Her intellectual equal. Before we reveal Warren's next statement and how it's shifting power within the Democratic Party, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This political shakeup is far from over, and you'll want to catch every aftershock. To understand just how monumental this moment was, let's look at who these 2 extraordinary women are and why their exchange could redefine the future of American politics. At 75, Elizabeth Warren stands as one of the Senate's true intellectual giants. Long before her political rise, she was a respected Harvard law professor specializing in bankruptcy and consumer protection. She earned degrees from the University of Houston and Rutgers Law School, where she graduated with honors. Warren's entrance into politics wasn't typical. She first gained national attention chairing the Congressional Oversight Panel for the Troubled Asset Relief Program after the 2008 financial crisis. Her sharp questioning of banking leaders and her talent for simplifying complex financial issues turned her into a trusted advocate for accountability and fairness. In 2012, Warren made history as the first female senator from Massachusetts. Throughout her Senate career, she has been recognized for her detailed policy plans, fearless questioning, and unwavering commitment to economic justice for working families. What makes her admiration so powerful in this moment is her reputation for rarely, if ever, giving out praise lightly. She's known for demanding intellectual rigor and pinpoint accuracy from anyone who appears before her committees. Her acknowledgment of Crockett's brilliance carried immense significance precisely because it was so rare. On the other side of this historic exchange stands Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old representative from Texas, who's quickly becoming one of the most dynamic voices in Congress. Before entering politics, Crockett built a strong reputation as a civil rights attorney and public defender, advocating for those who couldn't afford legal representation. A graduate of the University of Houston Law Center, she spent years in the courtroom taking on cases involving police misconduct, constitutional violations, and justice reform. Her hands-on legal experience gave her deep insight into how laws affect everyday Americans, especially those from underserved communities. Unlike many politicians who speak in broad theoretical terms, Crockett speaks from direct experience, from real courtrooms and real struggles. In 2020, Crockett was elected to the Texas House of Representatives, where she quickly earned recognition for her passionate defense of voting rights and criminal justice reform. Her effectiveness at the state level propelled her to a successful congressional campaign in 2022, representing Texas's 30th district. Since arriving in Washington, she's become known for her powerful committee performances, questioning with precision, clarity, and genuine depth. Her blend of legal expertise and the ability to explain complex issues in relatable terms has drawn praise from across the political spectrum. The stage for this unforgettable moment was a joint Senate-House hearing on the constitutional limits of executive power. The hearing was called amid public debate over recent executive orders that tested the separation of powers. The atmosphere that day was tense. Lawmakers had been pressing experts mostly on political angles, not on pure constitutional interpretation, until Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett spoke. What followed completely changed the tone of the entire proceeding. With remarkable calm and command, Crockett shifted the discussion away from politics and back to constitutional law itself. Her depth of understanding, backed by real legal precedent, left even the most experienced lawmakers in awe. As the hearing moved forward, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, listening closely to every exchange and jotting down precise notes while senior members took turns questioning the witnesses. By the time it was finally her turn, no one in the packed chamber had any idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. What seemed like an ordinary committee hearing was about to become a defining moment, one that would highlight the contrast between old guard leadership and a new generation of democratic thinkers rising in Washington. What do you think about this new wave of leaders in Congress? Do they bring the kind of fresh insight that longtime politicians often overlook? Let us know your views in the comments below, especially if you've lived through past political transitions and seen history repeat itself. That morning, the Grand Durkan Senate office building was filled to capacity. The chandeliers shimmered above the polished wooden panels as senators shuffled papers and adjusted their microphones. Around the room, media crews stood ready, cameras trained on the committee table to capture every word for the national audience. When Jasmine Crockett's name was finally called, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Some senior members glanced down at their watches. Others checked their phones, a common gesture when a newer representative took the floor. They were not expecting much, but what happened next caught everyone off guard. Crockett turned toward the constitutional expert seated before her, Professor Harrington, a distinguished Yale law scholar and former Department of Justice official. Professor Harrington, she began, her tone calm but commanding. You mentioned the concept of constitutional necessity earlier. Before we go deeper into that, I'd like to add a bit of historical context. What followed wasn't routine questioning. Instead of grandstanding or tossing out political talking points, Crockett delivered a structured and precise legal analysis of three landmark Supreme Court cases that defined the limits of presidential power during national emergencies. In Youngstown Sheet and Tupka v. Sawyer, she said smoothly, Justice Jackson's concurrence laid out a three-tier framework for evaluating executive action. She spoke without glancing at her notes. But what's often overlooked is how that framework evolved through Dames and Moore v. Reagan and later in Meddy v. Texas. Professor Harrington straightened in his chair, clearly surprised. Even veteran lawmakers began to take notice. The faint rustle of papers stopped. Attention returned to the front. Crockett continued with unwavering confidence, seamlessly connecting constitutional principles, historical rulings, and modern implications. She wasn't repeating case law, she was building a powerful argument about the balance of power between Congress and the executive branch, refining the scholar's own position in real time. The question isn't just whether the president can issue these orders, she explained, her tone deliberate and clear. The real issue is whether that authority flows directly from Article II powers, or if it demands explicit congressional approval under Justice Jackson's first category. That difference defines how our democracy maintains its checks and balances. By now, the energy in the hearing room had completely changed. Staffers who had been half listening looked up from their screens. Reporters who expected a routine session started typing rapidly, realizing they were witnessing something rare. Even the most senior senators were visibly attentive. Senator Richard Blumenthal, himself a former Supreme Court clerk, nodded several times in approval. Senator Amy Klobuchar, known for her own legal sharpness, leaned toward a colleague and gestured subtly toward Crockett. Her admiration unmistakable. What made Crockett's delivery so remarkable wasn't just her mastery of the law, it was her ability to apply those principles to real-world governance. She didn't talk in theories or abstractions. She showed exactly how constitutional structure should guide policymaking. When we evaluate these executive orders, she said, we must consider more than their stated goals. We must examine their structural impact, whether they strengthen or weaken the separation of powers that defines our republic. At that point, something almost unheard of happened. The expert witness himself began to shift his position. Congresswoman, Professor Harrington said with visible respect, you've raised an excellent observation regarding METI. I believe your interpretation of Chief Justice Roberts' majority opinion highlights a limitation I may not have fully emphasized in my earlier remarks. The room collectively reacted. It was rare, nearly unprecedented, for a prestigious scholar to publicly revise his stance in response to a question from a junior House member. Yet, here it was happening in real time. As her time wound down, Crockett expanded her focus, speaking not just as a lawyer, but as a guardian of democratic principle. Our framers designed this system not to function only during peace or agreement, she said, her voice steady. It was built to endure conflict, partisanship, and deep division. The legal standards we apply shouldn't change depending on which party holds power. What matters is whether our government respects the constitutional boundaries that protect our democracy from overreach. When she finally stopped speaking, the silence that followed wasn't routine or polite. It was the kind of stillness that comes when people realize they've just witnessed something historic. Even the committee chair broke decorum for a moment, simply saying with quiet sincerity, "Thank you, Representative Crockett." There was no immediate transition to the next speaker, just a long, heavy pause. Even that silence spoke volumes. And then something completely unexpected happened. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who wasn't even scheduled to speak at that moment, raised her hand and asked the chairman for permission to speak out of turn. It was an unusual request that instantly commanded attention. Everyone in the room understood that when Elizabeth Warren interrupted procedure, something important was about to happen. The chairman, clearly surprised but respectful, nodded and gave the senior senator from Massachusetts the floor. Warren adjusted her glasses and turned to face Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her expression calm but focused. The tension was palpable. Lawmakers leaned forward in their seats. Reporters froze mid-typing. Everyone wanted to hear what Warren, a woman known for her sharp intellect and high standards, was about to say. "Mr. Chairman," Warren began, her voice measured but carrying a warmth rarely heard in her famously combative tone. "I've just witnessed something truly exceptional, something that deserves recognition right now." She glanced toward Crockett and continued, "What Representative Crockett has presented today isn't just a set of questions. It's one of the clearest and most precise analyses of executive power limitations I've heard in all my years on this committee." The entire chamber went still. Elizabeth Warren, the senator known for grilling CEOs and cabinet officials without mercy, was offering open praise, and not just mild praise, but something that sounded historic. Everyone knew this was about to redefine how Washington viewed the rising Texas congresswoman. "I want to be absolutely clear about what we just witnessed," Warren continued, her tone now gaining intensity. "Representative Crockett just gave a constitutional analysis that rivals what I used to teach my third-year law students at Harvard, and she did it without notes, without hesitation, and with a clarity that frankly puts many of our colleagues to shame." As she removed her glasses, a gesture she reserved only for her most serious points, the meaning hit everyone at once. "I've spent decades studying and teaching constitutional law," Warren said firmly. "I don't say this lightly. What we just heard was brilliant. Not brilliant for a freshman member. Not brilliant for a former public defender. Simply brilliant by any standard in any room." The effect was immediate. Senior senators who had barely paid attention earlier now looked at Crockett with newfound respect. Journalists who had been casually scrolling their notes were now typing furiously. Realizing this was a moment that would dominate tomorrow's headlines, what made Warren's remarks so powerful wasn't just her political standing. It was her academic authority, a former Harvard law professor known for her mastery of constitutional law. Her praise wasn't political courtesy. It was a professional endorsement with enormous weight. The analysis Representative Crockett provided, Warren said, turning slightly toward the witness table, especially her interpretation of how the Youngstown framework interacts with modern federalism jurisprudence, is not just technically correct, it offers a balanced approach to executive power that honors both democratic accountability and constitutional design. Then Warren did something even more remarkable. Instead of ending her comments, she began building upon Crockett's analysis, treating her not as a junior member, but as a peer. If I may expand on Representative Crockett's point about Justice Jackson's concurrence, Warren said, what she identified is particularly significant in our current context. The twilight zone of overlapping executive and legislative authority that Jackson described has expanded dramatically in recent decades. Exactly. The kind of constitutional ambiguity the Congresswoman so precisely addressed. This was no longer a routine hearing. It was an intellectual dialogue between two powerful legal minds, one a senior senator and former Harvard professor, the other a rising House member with real-world courtroom experience. The chairman, recognizing how rare this moment was, allowed the exchange to continue beyond the usual time limits. The discussion evolved into a detailed, back-and-forth conversation about separation of powers, judicial interpretation, and modern governance. At one point, Warren nodded toward Crockett and said, her observation about how the Roberts Court has subtly adjusted the Youngstown standard without overturning it outright, that's exactly right. It's the kind of nuance that only comes from practicing constitutional law, not just theorizing about it. That comment landed hard in the chamber. Warren's words weren't just about legal interpretation, they carried a broader message about the value of practical legal experience. For years, Capitol Hill had been dominated by lawmakers with corporate or academic backgrounds. Warren's praise for Crockett, a former civil rights attorney and public defender, challenged the long-held bias that only certain types of legal careers carry prestige in Congress. Senator Dick Durbin, the Senate Majority Whip, nodded visibly. As a lawyer himself, he seemed to understand the importance of that recognition. Even Professor Harrington, the Yale scholar who had testified earlier, appeared taken aback. Trying to rejoin the conversation, he admitted, Senator Warren and Representative Crockett have identified a tension in our separation of powers. Jurisprudence that absolutely deserves further scholarly examination. It was a quiet but powerful admission. The expert witness was now trying to keep up with the lawmakers. The balance of authority in the room had completely shifted. As this extraordinary dialogue unfolded, Jasmine Crockett's transformation was undeniable. She had entered the hearing as a junior member, one of many, freshmen still finding their footing in Congress, but by the time this exchange ended, she had established herself as a rising legal force, respected not just for her passion, but for her depth of knowledge and intellectual command that few could match. As the discussion between Warren and Crockett unfolded, something remarkable began to take shape. Each moment strengthened Crockett's presence in the room. Staffers who had barely noticed her earlier were now watching intently. Senior members who might normally step out during a junior representative's questioning remained seated, captivated. The atmosphere shifted, the balance of influence in that chamber was being rewritten before everyone's eyes. Senator Warren closed her remarks with a statement destined to echo across news cycles. I've worked with many brilliant colleagues over the years, she said, but I want to state publicly what many of us have observed privately. Representative Jasmine Crockett represents the future of legal thinking in Congress, and that future is incredibly bright. The room erupted in applause, an uncommon breach of formality that the chairman allowed to continue. fully aware of the historical moment taking place. Crockett rose with grace and humility, her response marked by the same poise that had defined her questioning. "Senator Warren's words mean more to me than I can express," she said, her tone steady but sincere. "Coming from someone whose legal scholarship I studied in law school, this is an honor I never expected. But what matters most isn't recognition. It's the fact that we're engaging in a real discussion about constitutional principles that rise above party lines. That's what the American people deserve from this chamber." That simple yet powerful response shifted the focus from personal praise to shared purpose. It confirmed that Crockett wasn't chasing applause. She was pursuing substance and truth. When the hearing returned to order, the energy in the room was entirely different. It was clear that Jasmine Crockett's standing had changed, not just among her colleagues but throughout Washington. Senator Elizabeth Warren, one of the most respected voices in the Democratic Party, had just recognized Crockett as a rising intellectual force, and she did so not through political courtesy, but with genuine respect for her constitutional brilliance. In that moment, Crockett's status within the Democratic hierarchy transformed. She was no longer viewed as just a freshman lawmaker. She was now a voice of real influence in shaping national policy and the party's direction. Journalists in the room immediately recognized the significance of the exchange. They described it as a torch-passing moment, a defining scene that could reshape both women's legacies, and perhaps the very future of Democratic leadership itself. In the days that followed, the political world buzzed with reaction. The once routine hearing had turned into a pivotal event in modern Democratic history. The Washington Post ran a front-page story. "Warren acknowledges rising star veteran senator calls Crockett's legal analysis brilliant." The New York Times followed with, "A generational handshake, Warren's endorsement of Crockett signals Democratic evolution." Cable networks replayed the exchange on loop. Legal experts and political commentators dissected every line of their dialogue. Prominent constitutional scholars from leading law schools weighed in, confirming that Warren's praise wasn't based on politics. It was grounded in genuine legal excellence. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe shared, "What we witnessed wasn't just strong politics. It was exceptional constitutional reasoning." Representative Crockett's integration of textualism, historical understanding, and structural analysis demonstrates a depth of thought that transcends ideology. That validation from academia mattered deeply. It proved that Crockett's rise was rooted in intellectual merit, not media attention or party loyalty. The impact was immediate. Senior Democratic figures began reaching out to her office, requesting briefings and seeking her insight on legislation concerning executive power, judicial appointments, and constitutional oversight. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi soon appointed Crockett to a special task force on separation of powers, an extraordinary role for a first-term representative. It was clear that the recognition Warren had sparked was now becoming institutionalized. Even more meaningful was the cultural shift it triggered within the Democratic Party. Longtime lawmakers who had once viewed the younger, more progressive members with hesitation now began listening more closely. Senator Chuck Schumer cited Crockett's constitutional analysis during a press briefing, signaling that her influence had reached the very top levels of leadership. Warren, meanwhile, continued to champion Crockett publicly. In a podcast interview days later, she explained, "I've taught law and served in government long enough to recognize true brilliance when I see it. What impressed me most about Representative Crockett wasn't just her knowledge. It was her ability to bring complex constitutional concepts to life and make them understandable. That's the mark of someone who doesn't just quote the law, she shapes it." Warren also highlighted the power of Crockett's background. Her experience as a public defender gives her an invaluable perspective, one that, too, often gets overlooked in Congress. She's seen firsthand how the Constitution operates in real courtrooms and affects real people. That's a perspective our democracy needs more of. Her words marked a turning point in how Washington valued different types of legal experience. For years, corporate law and elite clerkships had been the standard of prestige. But after this exchange, the spotlight shifted toward those like Jasmine Crockett, whose work came from the courtroom, the community, and the fight for justice itself. Warren's remarks had done more than just praise Crockett. They had quietly challenged the traditional hierarchy of legal prestige in Washington. By highlighting the value of public defense and frontline legal work, Warren suggested that true understanding of justice often comes from those who see the system up close, not only from those who study it from elite offices or courtrooms. Her comments reshaped how people thought about preparation for leadership in government. For Jasmine Crockett, however, this new attention brought both opportunity and responsibility. She handled her sudden rise with remarkable grace, showing political maturity beyond her years. Crockett balanced humility with confidence, acknowledging her moment while keeping her focus firmly on the work ahead. In her first major television interview after the hearing, CNN's Anderson Cooper asked how she felt about Warren's powerful endorsement. "Senator Warren's words were incredibly generous," Crockett replied with calm sincerity. "But what matters most isn't recognition, it's that we're developing a consistent, constitutional approach to governance that can guide good policy, no matter which party holds power." When Cooper asked if she saw herself following in Warren's footsteps, perhaps running for the Senate one day, Crockett smiled and answered thoughtfully, "Right now, my focus is on serving my constituents and contributing meaningfully to these constitutional discussions." Senator Warren has shown how to blend deep expertise with genuine commitment to public service. That's the example I aim to follow, whatever position I hold in the future. Her response was perfectly balanced, smart, forward-looking, and grounded in service rather than ambition. It reassured voters and colleagues alike that her priorities were rooted in principle, not self-promotion. Outside Washington, Crockett's growing reputation resonated with two important groups: legal professionals and younger voters. Bar associations began inviting her to speak at conferences. Law schools requested her as a guest lecturer. For a first-term representative, this level of professional attention was rare and reflected just how strongly Warren's praise had validated Crockett's legal credibility among younger audiences, especially law students and early career attorneys. Crockett quickly became a symbol of hope and generational change. Social media buzzed with admiration for her story. One viral post from a law student captured the sentiment perfectly. "Watching Representative Crockett get recognized by Senator Warren made me proud of my path as a public defender. It proves that this kind of work can lead to real influence and respect." That sense of pride spread across different communities that had often felt unseen in political and legal spaces. Crockett's rise, validated publicly by someone as respected as Warren, signaled that doors were finally opening for those from non-traditional legal backgrounds. Over the following months, the ripple effects extended deep into Democratic circles. The party began rethinking what legal expertise should mean in a modern democracy. Instead of relying mainly on former prosecutors or corporate lawyers, leaders started to seek insight from attorneys who had worked in civil rights, public defense, and legal aid. Senator Dick Durbin, chair of the Judiciary Committee, made this change official when he announced a new advisory panel on judicial nominations, one that would include lawyers from a broader range of professional paths. "As we were reminded in recent hearings," Durbin said, "exceptional legal thinking can come from many directions. Our understanding of the Constitution grows richer when we include diverse experiences in the conversation." 6 months after the historic hearing, the American Constitution Society hosted a symposium titled "New Voices in Constitutional Interpretation." Both Senator Warren and Representative Crockett were invited as keynote speakers. The event symbolized how the legal world was evolving, welcoming new generations and new perspectives into the national conversation on constitutional law. During her address, Warren made the transition explicit. "For too long, we've defined legal expertise too narrowly," she said. "We've excluded voices that could deepen our understanding of how the Constitution actually works in people's lives." Representative Crockett represents this new generation of legal thinkers who are broadening and enriching that discussion. Crockett's response captured exactly why her story resonated so widely. The Constitution doesn't belong to any one party, profession, or generation, she said firmly. It belongs to the American people. Our shared duty across generations is to ensure its protections reach everyone, especially those whose voices have been ignored for too long. As she spoke, cameras caught Warren nodding in quiet agreement. That single image, mentor and protege united by shared respect, became symbolic of a larger truth. A new generation of leadership was rising. Not through competition or ambition, but through mutual recognition and merit. The Warren and Crockett moment had grown far beyond one hearing. It had become a blueprint for how political power could be passed responsibly, not by age or title, but through shared commitment to principles, intellect, and public service. As their collaboration continued, one message became clear: American democracy grows stronger when experience makes room for new talent, and when that new talent honors those who came before. The exchange between Elizabeth Warren and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just about two women. It was about how healthy democracies renew themselves through wisdom that lifts new voices, and new voices that carry wisdom forward. If you found this political analysis meaningful, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more insights into the evolving leadership shaping America's future. And share your thoughts in the comments. How do you see this generational shift redefining the future of politics?